Go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the Aspen Pitkin County Housing Authority, April 21st. Cindy, please call the roll.
Carson?
Here.
Kelly?
Yeah, here.
Rachel?
Here.
David?
Here.
John?
Here.
And Rick?
Whoop.
Here.
And Francie.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. So I just have one change to the agenda tonight, and that will be to move the Board of Directors comments from after the executive session to before the executive session so that we don't have to return for GrassRoots after the executive session. So with that, we'll go ahead and move to public comments, 3-minute time limit. And is there anyone out there with a public comment? Doesn't look like it. Hearing none. Going once, going twice. All right. We'll close the public comment and move to Executive Director's comments and a staff update. Diane, go ahead.
Thanks, Carson. May I share my screen?
You're all set.
Absolutely. Is that something I need to do?
No, I've got it. I just need to, I have the packet up, so let me close this and switch my screens. This should work better. Okay, in theory, you should be able to see that now. And to start off, Executive Director Recruitment, we are still working on that, and we had some good interviews, and I'll just keep you posted on how we're doing. On seller standards, capital improvements, thank you so much. As of this morning, 5 of you had answered the survey already, which was stunning. So if there's any way, if you don't have the link or you don't know what I'm talking about, just let me know. Send me a text, send me an email. I sent an survey out yesterday specifically because a few people did send me both home inspection and seller standards feedback, and what I found was it wasn't going to be possible to process that and bring it back to you because people commented on so many different areas. So I do have that information. I will end up adding it to the survey results, but it's just 7 questions, and it will help us take the next step in that discussion. As I mentioned in the email, this is going to take months, and it's going to need, this board has always been interested in public input. This is going to require a lot of input from the community as well. And actually maybe one of those items that we more formally bring back to the city and the county, particularly if there's a role for them. So with that, thanks in advance for sending that, and I will probably send out a reminder if we don't hit, hopefully we'll hit 6 or 7 by the weekend. Thank you.
You have 6 now. I sent mine in. You have 6.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Francie. I was super happy, so thank you, and that gives me a little bit more time to prep the report, and I'll be feeding all of that back to you on the May 5th and framing that, the start of that discussion.
Diane, I sent mine back about a half an hour ago as well.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. We're going to be up to 7. Okay, you guys just made my week. Thank you. Cindy, all yours.
Okay. As hopefully everybody remembers that we increase our income limits by the area median income on a yearly basis. We get those statistics from CHA, Colorado Housing Finance Authority, and they're through HUD. We did receive those a week ago. They're based on a category, or they're based on 100% AMI with a household of 4. They went down. that amount went down. It went down from 110,500 to 106,400. That changes incomes anywhere from 1,400 up to 11,000 per how many people are in a household. We have the ability to opt not to change those. So staff is going to keep them the same as 2020. For our low-income housing tax credit properties, that CHAFA already allows that. If the incomes go down, you can keep them the same as the previous year. So for Truscott and ACI, they're being kept the same. So we feel it's in the best interest of all parties who enter into our lotteries and who are in our rental situations to keep the incomes the same. So that's the direction that we're going on these. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
When CHAPA gives us the area medium income, what are the boundaries of the area they're measuring? Is it just Pitkin County, or is it where 50% of our workforce comes from the rest of the Roaring Fork Valley?
To tell you the truth, Rachel, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm almost sure it's just Pitkin County, because all the other counties have different ones. We get a whole list of all the counties in Colorado.
I've raised this point with the city council, and I'll just mention it here one more time. When I've investigated area medium income, they tend to use the geographic area where an area's workforce comes from. And I think that we're kind of skewing our incomes and what people are making here based on the area medium income that is just the free market mix and affordable housing mix in Pitkin County. And, again, the example is the DC area. They use an area medium income that includes all the surrounding states, and I think totals 20 municipalities and counties, because they know their workforce comes in from 40 and 50 miles away. And I just think we need to start being more accurate with where our workforce comes from and what the wages people are making trying to find housing in our area. So I just really would like to have the detail on that and ask, are we using an accurate measure?
I will look into that and try to find out if the board wants us to readdress that. That would be a regulation change, and that is something that we can add on to our list of things to bring back to the board. But I will do a little bit more research on that to find out what area they use for Pitkin County.
Yeah, no, thank you. When you say a guideline or regulation change, is that because our guidelines state the boundary of where we want area in medium income measured?
No, it states that we use Pitkin County AMI. That's published by CHAPA.
Okay, I got that. Thank you. So it does say that. Okay.
Thanks, Rachel. Kelly, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. It's no surprise people made less money last year, right? But how does this affect, since our category levels are based on AMI percentages, how does this affect folks who are, qualifying for rental and purchases?
Well, for one thing, for ownership, it could, somebody who's in a category 3 could now be down. I'm not sure if it goes down or up, but it could affect some people's categories where they're no longer in that specific category. So when they requalify, if we change it, it could be that they cannot bid on those units anymore, or that eventually they would have to possibly move out. This way, those people that are in it, there's not an issue, and I do know that this did happen once before, where it went down. We did go ahead and move everything down but it was such a small change that it didn't affect, it really didn't affect anybody's category. They pretty much stayed within that same category. This, looking at it, it would change some people's categories.
Okay, so I'm unclear then. I just want to be able to make sure we're communicating clearly to the public and folks who may be updating their packets, et cetera, what they can expect. So were you proposing that the categories do shift based on the current AMI and the current percentages, or retaining last year's AMIs for the remainder of 2021?
Retaining last year's AMI that we're already working on, or that we're already working off of in 2020. So no change.
And is the justification for that COVID?
Yes, that's one of the justifications, yes. And another one is because the LIHTC properties, the low-income housing tax credit properties, allow that to happen, and I think they kind of recommend that in order to be the same across the board, we feel that it's necessary to kind of keep all the incomes the same instead of decreasing them.
Okay, thank you.
John.
So I get it with the LIHTC properties, because essentially you don't want to create a problem with somebody that's already a tenant that, if their income didn't decrease, but they fall right at that cap. If their income was higher than what the cap was, they'd have to move out, correct?
That is correct, and we did increase our rental rates, and we did increase our sales prices. So to me, we're also doing a disservice if we decrease incomes when we increased everything else.
But doesn't that, it keeps that, I'm trying to think of the impact on categories. So if somebody's income went down, we didn't decrease the category income. So it doesn't really have an impact on buyers?
No, it doesn't have an impact on buyers or renters.
Okay.
Well, who does it then?
Well, wouldn't it have an impact on if somebody was sort of right on the bubble for, say, a category 4, and then if we adjusted the AMI down, the category max could theoretically drop below, right? They could qualify for it this year, and then if it dropped, then they wouldn't qualify, so they wouldn't be able to bid if we dropped it.
That is correct.
Isn't that correct, Cindy?
That is correct.
Yeah, not adopting it means we're maintaining the status quo.
Correct.
Period, and across rentals and categories.
Correct.
It sounds like I'm certainly supportive of that. I guess, Cindy, are you looking for direction from the board, or?
No, it's basically, we never usually come to you. It's just something that's automatically done by staff. And we just wanted to make you aware of what's going on for this year, and that we are keeping everything as status quo for 2021.
Great. John, did you have a question, or was your hand still?
You're supposed to lower my hand when I'm done asking the question, Carson. Don't you know the protocols here, buddy?
Now you were muted, Carson. We didn't hear you.
Growing pains. Cindy, anything else for the board?
Nope, not from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And that's it from staff. Thank you.
Great. So moving along then to consent calendar, would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of April 7th regular meeting or amendments.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
I have one correction on the minutes. I was looking at my comments, and I'm I'm at a loss to what a Google is. It says, let's see, where was it? Director had stated he doesn't believe that 148 total responses are a Google enough sample size.
A gaggle.
You probably said good.
I
I'll
don't know if
change
that's
that.
what I said. Maybe ample or.
Good enough.
It
You
was
probably
good
said
enough.
We'll change that. We'll fix
Yeah.
that.
But I thought your generation used the Google.
So I just want to make that comment. That's all.
The correction will be accepted by the maker of the motion as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So it sounds like we've got a motion and a second with the
One more
amendment from Rick.
correction.
And then go ahead, Kelly.
Sorry, I just have one more correction. Just in my director comments, the first number I referenced was 90 million, not 9 million. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
We'll make both those corrections. We ready for roll call vote?
Great. Cindy, please call the roll.
Okay. Rick?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Rachel?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Looks like next item on the agenda is discussion with Community Development Department on the potential amendments to the City Land Use Code. And so is that going to be led by staff? Do you want to take that, or Ben or Philip? Are you on the line?
Hi there, Mr. Chair. It's good to see all of you. Some of you I know, but for the record, Ben Anderson from City of Aspen Community Development Department. More than anything tonight, I wanted to introduce myself. Some of you, I've worked with on other things. I used to come and present to the APCHA board under the previous governance structure when we asked you for recommendations on development reviews, but I haven't been in front of you for some time. And I wanted to just, I promised Diane and Cindy that I would stick to 30 minutes. I've got some slides that I'd like to present, and I wanted to make sure that we had some time for some question and answer. I did provide Cindy, and I think it was included in your packet, a memo and a report on our fee and lieu analysis that we've done recently. City Council and Community Development have been having extensive conversations over the last year and a half or so about City Council's affordable housing goals, coordination with the Land Use Code, and more recently we've been having some conversations just about our growth management quota system in general, and whether or not in today's development context in Aspen, whether or not that system that's been around since the late 1970s, are there things that we need to rethink in response to sort of items that are coming up? So, the big message this evening is that, City Council and Community Development have been working on some things and are going to be working perhaps on some bigger things in the coming months. I know APCHA is working on things, and, I think as I've come to understand, the context in Aspen, the interrelatedness of the Land Use Code, that is my sort of area of expertise, and APCHA guidelines and development standards, those things are very integrated. And when it comes to looking at actual projects and policies, I just wanted to encourage us to have open communication and to work together when there's a good reason to do so. And just for example, the discussion tonight on income levels, that has ripples through the land use code, and I'll speak to one of those things this evening. So anyway, enough of an introduction. If it's okay, I would like to share my screen. I've got some slides to go through, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through, but I really would like to keep about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers if we need to talk about anything specific.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, go ahead, share your screen.
Okay. Is that showing up for everybody? Not quite yet. Here we go. One more button to push. There we go.
Great.
There we go.
Okay. So again, Ben Anderson, Community Development. This is a modified, truncated version of a conversation that we had with City Council earlier this week. I've talked a little bit about this. The City Council and ComDev have been talking about some things that I do think have some fairly direct interaction with some of the things that APCHA is working on. Tonight, I want to focus on some code amendments that are coming in front of Council in the next couple of weeks. We've been asked by Council to do an update to our fee in lieu, which is referenced in the APCHA guidelines, and as you're going to see, relies heavily on APCHA, sales and rental figures for a revenue stream within that fee in lieu calculation. We are proposing some improvements to our affordable housing credits program that again have some interaction with stated guidelines that APCHA has in place, both in the development requirements and also in the kind of your primary guidelines document. This got in the paper. We are proposing an elimination of lodge incentives and credits, and I'm not going to talk extensively about this with you this evening, but this has the effect of getting rid of some incentives that were put in place back in 2007 that reduce mitigation requirements for lodge development. And I think priorities in the community have shifted a little bit away from kind of the lodge unit types that were in the community to affordable housing. And so we're proposing to get rid of those that exist. And then lastly, and I can't speak to how important this is, particularly with aging multifamily projects that we have kind of scattered throughout town that are starting to reach the end of their lifespan. The multifamily replacement program has been in place, since the late 1980s. It's worked to some degree in protecting, affordable, free market, multifamily units for working residents. And a lot of those projects are starting to come to the end of their lifespan, and we need to kind of rethink some of the policies that we have in place for those properties. We have had consultant support, some national consultants on the fee in lieu study, and we've been working with Design Workshop locally on the multifamily replacement analysis. And I'm going to finish with the fee in lieu discussion because I think it's probably most interesting to you and has the most detail there. And if we need to stop and talk about any of the stuff on the fee in lieu, so I'm going to leave that to the last and talk about some of these things that we're proposing in the other areas before we get to the fee in lieu. The credits program, has been a really successful program. The idea behind it is to get the private sector development community to develop affordable housing units without the city or without APCHA having to sort of lay out money. And it's been successful. I think we've, developed projects that I think roughly have housed 120 FTEs over its life. It's become a really central aspect in the way that free market development provides their mitigation requirements. But it's starting to struggle a little bit under some big concerns, and I'll talk about those in a second. We're not proposing a response to those big concerns just because they would change the fundamental nature of the project or of the program, but we are making some kind of small incremental changes that might have some impact on individual projects to make them viable, to give some additional incentive. The first is that we're going to be giving some clarity in the land use code to make sure that developers understand that they can pursue both Aspen housing credits and other incentives like LIHTC credits simultaneously on the same project. And there's been a little confusion around that. I don't know if it was the intent of the code language around the credits program, but certainly people have read that. So we're giving some clarity around that just to make sure that people understand that both of those incentives are available to them. One of the things we've heard from developers is that, right now, if a project gets affordable housing credits, for developing AH units, those credits aren't issued to the developer until certificate of occupancy. And so they've gone through, maybe an 18-month construction cycle, but that huge revenue stream that's coming into the project doesn't come in until the very end. And so this would allow a phasing of those credits over the construction process, where they'd get 30% at foundation, 30% at framing, and then 40% at certificate of occupancy. One of the other things is we've had a lot of interest in affordable housing developments for credits on historically designated properties, and it's an expensive process to preserve a property. There's some limits in terms of mass and scale, and if you're building new, some new construction on site, having that relate to the historic asset is often difficult and expensive, and so we're proposing a multiplier of 20% for units that are contained within a designated property. And then lastly, and this one does have some pretty clear intersection with APCHA guidelines. We've had some interest in kind of older multifamily projects. The code allows for the conversion of free market multifamily into deed restricted category units. But we've had some disconnect between the requirements of the land use code of how many credits are issued and unit size minimums in the APCHA guidelines, and those things not being aligned with each other. And this would allow some further alignment of those things and some clarity around how much credit you would actually get if you had a 2-bedroom unit that was configured that way. APCHA thought it was a good unit and allowed to come into the inventory, but it maybe didn't meet minimum size. And so the way that the credit program works creates some difficulty with that, and this just gives some clarity to that. I can explain that further if people later. So we're not dealing with the big issues. The big issues is that banks don't understand the value of our credits, and so it's hard to build those into a pro forma for a project. And then the other thing is, and this is just a fundamental question within the development context in Aspen, is that, if you build a project, you've got credits on hand, you can't be certain that there's going to be a demand for those credits because of the kind of cyclical nature of development and demand for credits. And so those two things have maybe caused the credits program to be a little bit less successful than it otherwise could be. They're still on our radar, but we're not proposing any responses to those at this time. It would require some pretty big policy changes for the city to engage in that. Multifamily replacement, very quickly on this, we've done an awful lot of study with Design Workshop of looking at different development scenarios and how these policies play out. Again, this is really important to preserving, particularly aging multifamily projects and making sure that those units, as they're redeveloped, turn into a housing product that makes some sense either as a deed restricted unit, a resident occupied unit, or a balance with free market units. So we're doing a lot of study. We're not quite yet ready to make big policy changes to that, but we are going to be proposing to council a cleanup to make that section much more understandable. Kelly, I see your hand up.
When do you want me to ask my questions about the credit program?
If it seems great, we can do it now.
I mean, I can totally hold it too. I've jotted down my notes.
No, that's fine. No,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'm just wondering. I love buy downs for a lot of reasons, but right now the credits are being generated with sort of new construction that's built up to a newer desirability and livability and energy efficiency and things like that.
Yes.
I just have some concerns about there being kind of a one-to-one credit for a buy down for perhaps a less desirable unit. So just a consideration there.
Yeah, certainly. And I have a quick response to that, and that we haven't had a ton of proposal around this, but there have been some projects. And a few years ago, I think APCHA and the building department worked on some clear standards for what both APCHA and the building department were looking for if a project was going to be brought into the inventory, kind of minimum standards, what degree of renovation and updating was going to be necessary for those units to come online. So I do think that there's been discussion around this, but I think Rachel's raised this question in our conversations as well, and I think it's legitimate at this time. It is a one-to-one as long as they're units that APCHA, using your development guidelines, would allow to come into the inventory.
Thank you.
And then this is just a quick slide talking about the lodge incentives. Again, this has, I think, less impact on APCHA, but I think it does have impact on perhaps mitigation requirements for lodge development moving forward. Again, just for people, their context on this, this really emerged from the discussion around the Lithlin Corridor projects, Lithlin Lodge and Gorsuch House, which both took full advantage of these incentives, purely compliant with code. It's not like we bent rules for them, but I don't know that the kinds of units that came out of those projects are going to come out of those projects, were a fair trade for the loss of affordable housing mitigation that the projects produced. And so I think that was, we've gotten really clear direction from council on this. So the topic I wanted to give a little bit more time to is the fee in lieu, just because this is certainly referenced in APCHA's guidelines. I think for the majority of the fee in lieu, I think APCHA was actually responsible for creating the fee in lieu, and that responsibility has moved over to community development over time. The fee in lieu as a method of providing affordable housing mitigation has been available to development since 1985. For the first 16 years of its existence, there were some updates, as some purchases were made and had some costs around land and had some projects go through the process. They're a little haphazard, those increments and those changes over those years. And then between 2002 and 2015, pretty standard yearly updates using Consumer Price Index or 3%, whichever was less. 2012, there was a big study that was done, and the consultant that was hired recommended this market affordability gap method, which tried to understand the difference between free market and affordable costs in Aspen. And the fee and lieu that were proposed were pretty astronomical. And city council balked at it. APCHA, I think, balked at it a little bit, and certainly the development community did. And for 3 years, we were kind of in a little bit of limbo. There's a study out there. Council hadn't landed on anything. Finally, in 2015, council pursued a different methodology for the calculation of the fee in lieu, landed on a methodology using primarily kind of some assumptions about what became the affordable housing partnership projects that just came online, and also some assumptions about APCHA sales and rental prices. So those numbers kind of serve as the basis for what we have codified right now. We did an update in 2018 that we're currently sitting on in the land use code. There was a 7% increase using a national construction cost index. And then over the last couple of years, we've worked with these consultant teams to start working on a new methodology, and we're proposing a new calculation. And I'll go through this really quickly. There's a lot of numbers that are going to flash in front of your face. I'm happy to stop on any of them if you have questions. There's one page I'm going to kind of focus on just because I think it has most to do with APCHA. We wanted to use actual land and development costs. We used 5 projects for construction that have happened in the last couple of years. We used 7 properties for land costs. It was important for us to get down to a square foot of net livable. I think you folks have it in your guidelines as well. We use this 400 square feet of net livable per FTE, and that was kind of the calculation within all of these projects to bring them down to a common denominator. And then we can get up to what a fee in lieu is, or a cost per FTE, by multiplying the cost that we get per square foot by 400. And this is the item that really involves APCHA. We need, if we've got a cost, we're going to have revenue come in from projects when they get built. And this is the place where we had to make some assumptions and where APCHA figures really fit into the equation. And so just to kind of keep in your back of your mind, as you folks make decisions about sales rates, about rental rates, it has a direct implication on the fee in lieu. And we use the APCHA heavily in our calculation. Because what we do then is take the cost per FTE and subtract from that the revenue, and that gives us our fee in lieu by category. So we used, on the construction cost side, we kind of used a mix of private-public and private-public partnership projects. That was important for us to get a mix of those kinds of projects. These are projects that have either been completed in the last couple of years. Burlingame 3 is in for building permit right now, and we had pretty good estimates on the cost of that project. And again, this is for the construction costs, both soft and hard construction costs. Land costs, we used 7 parcels, either in, projects that are in land use approval, in construction, recently completed. And the big conversation was around lumberyard, kind of the elephant in the room comparative to the size of these other projects. But we felt that it was important to include those. And if you look, we were a little bit, you start to break these numbers down and understand what it's costing to build a unit of affordable housing in Aspen. I think we all know that number is high, but I think the good thing about this study is that it looked at a bunch of projects and came up with an average to give us a sense of like, what does it really cost? Total construction costs averaged across these projects, $688 a square foot, combining both soft and hard construction costs. And then on land, $417 per square foot, for the land per each square foot. And again, when I say square foot, this is of net livable. And then here are the big numbers. Combined, $1,105 a square foot, combining land and construction costs. You take that out to FTE, and for each FTE, it's costing $442,000 on average across this project to build an affordable housing unit. And this is the slide that I wanted to stop on for just a second. And this is the revenue calculation. We used APCHA sales prices in your current guidelines. We use rental prices. The sales prices are easy. You can take a one-bedroom unit, the max sales price, and divide it by 1.75 for a one-bedroom, and you can get a pretty easy revenue on the sales side of things. But we also wanted to make sure that we were thinking about rental revenue and trying to accommodate that some way in our calculation. And so we did it through averaging, but the rental income is interesting just because you have to make some assumptions around it. We took rental revenue out 15 years, kind of increased by 2%, which seems to be a kind of a number that's been consistent across APCHA's history to some degree, more or less. And then we subtracted from that revenue 50% kind of as an assumption for kind of maintenance and operations and all the other costs that could be incurred by a project over time. And then we averaged those two things together. This is the place where there's some assumptions. I think the cost numbers are pretty good. But this is, again, using numbers from APCHA, but having to make some assumptions about the revenue. And when I pull up the fee in lieu in just a second, you're going to see a big difference of increase between categories across between 2018 and now. And it has to do with the way kind of these revenue numbers, comparing APCHA sales and APCHA revenue or rental rates, kind of relate to each other as you go up and down the categories. And it's important. I think you folks should set your sales and rental rates, as you see fit and what makes most sense for your programs and for the housing stock in Aspen. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that it has a really big impact kind of in the fee in lieu. Rachel, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Just a kind of a real quick comment, putting my APCHA hat on here. What we're really wrestling with is that our rental incomes and other things aren't really enough to keep up the units. We look at these rental units and we've taken new money from the 150 fund and put into the maintenance. So I don't know that 50% is really all you should subtract. I literally have been around long enough. I remember people thinking, oh, Trustcut will be a cash cow once the original bonds are paid off and start paying for more housing to be created. And instead, it just takes money out of the housing fund, creation fund, for return. So again, this is just something we're struggling with, and we don't know that we as APCHA have really good or accurate information. So I just, I think that 50% number is a little low based on what we've actually seen in our rental projects, and we should try to get more accurate numbers, because I know once we do this work, we're not going to redo it again for a while.
Right.
Thank you.
No, and I think it's a great point, and I think you kind of have some, as we all do on all of these policy choices, we've got levers to pull, and so whether it's the rental rate or it's the maintenance and operation deduction, when we studied projects, we found ranges of 25 to 80% of kind of costs, and we felt just looking at what's included in those kinds of things, that 50% was a number that we could use, that was repeatable, that seemed within the realm of reason. So, but I agree with you that whether it's a rental rate that's not high enough to cover costs, or whether we're not, that's
the one thing, Ben. The rental rates are based on how people are earning money. So we can't just say, okay, we're going to raise the rental rate enough to cover this maintenance down to 50%, and sorry, you're going to have to pay 50% of your income to live here. So that is not a lever we can pull. That is very specific. So, but what does? So I'm just saying, 50% is not an accurate number when you're trying to subsidize people living in a Category 2 or 1 unit. It's just not accurate for rentals. I'm not even sure if it's accurate on rentals on the Category 3s. But we do have life examples that are open books through Pete Strecker and the finance department of everything we've had to pour into those rental projects to keep them livable. Yeah.
And I guess my only response is we had to kind of land on a number that we could defend. And yes, I understand, at some categories in some projects, that the maintenance operating deferred maintenance costs are going to be higher. But that 50% number was kind of what we landed on. But it's an assumption and fairly debatable for sure.
Great, thanks.
Looks like we get a question from Rick and then Kelly.
Yes, thank you. Ben, I see that they're using a national engineering news record and construction cost index. What is their reticence about using a city-specific cost index?
Well, we've looked at, so first of all, this engineering news record is a nationally available, highly regarded kind of source. They do specific cities across the country. Certainly there's a number for Denver. Denver's, as we looked at Denver, which is closest geographically to us, is much lower than the national average for a variety of reasons. And so the national average was identified by these consultants that work nationally as a kind of even out kind of seasonal differences between places, the impact of natural disasters that drive up costs from one jurisdiction to or one municipality to the next, year to year. And it was something that we could use that was, again, defensible, which is this is essentially an impact fee, and defensibility is the kind of primary concern of this. And if you start using individual jurisdictions and that number spikes for whatever reason because of a national disaster, then you've got a number that's biased one way or the other. And so the idea of a national index is that year to year it's a good average across the country. We thought about looking at a place like Palo Alto that's got construction costs similar to here, or San Francisco, but again subject to kind of year to year fluctuations. The only thing I would counter then is that we are kind of requiring every 5 years a full cost reevaluation using actual projects here in Aspen, because we also know that even if using a national index, that it's not even close to what things cost here.
Well, my concern is that Aspen is always higher than the national in everything that we do, and it just doesn't seem like an accurate measure. We're double what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a fairly reasonable perspective, and I've heard it from several from several folks, and I think it's a very valid concern. It's just that getting at local numbers that are accurate and defensible is practically impossible on a year-to-year basis. We can go to the effort and take the effort on every 5 years to look at actual projects, but year to year, you know, it was a big deal to get like one private developer to tell us what it's costing to build an affordable housing unit in Aspen. And so to try to get, and to be quite frank, the construction companies won't talk to us about their costs kind of in any specific ways. So that was a decision that kind of these folks that work on impact fees kind of landed on in terms of defensibility year to year.
So perhaps in 5 years we could maybe tighten this up a little bit using some numbers over that period.
Yeah, and you know, the year to year there's going to be some percentage of increase based on national, and then every 5 years with the space to where we've got some projects that have been built and some land that's been purchased, that we'd go through this exercise that we've just gone through every 5 years to get a more specific update to Aspen.
Thank you.
Kelly.
Thanks. I have a couple questions, but I will echo Rick's concern. That was one of the questions on my list as well. So I'll leave that at that. But then another question I have is with regards to the FTEs that we're using as a divider there. What have we proofed those? You know, when I look at like Burlingame 3, and we have 79 units that are going to create 190 plus FTEs. Like, have we looked at past developments to actually say, okay, well, did those 80 units produce that many FTEs? Or, these fractions are a little odd. So I guess I'm wondering like how APCHA deals with that, because I don't know the answer to that question. And then
the way that we get to those,
it's loud, and I'll ask my others.
Yeah, the way that we get to those numbers, and it's how when we're evaluating whether it's a city project like Burlingame or one of the credits projects, it's the generation of FTEs is entirely based on the number of bedrooms, and so there's code described, and I think it's in APCHA's guidelines as well about sort of number of FTEs per bedroom, and that's the multiplier and how we get at these fractions. It's not sort of number of actual people that are living in the places. It's this the number of bedrooms, and then this 400 square foot per FTE was an important calculation as well. So it's again using the stuff that's in the land use code and in the APCHA guidelines.
Kelly, if I can jump in for a second, it just changes too frequently, and it is an unusual number. You can have a 2-bedroom with a couple and a child, and suddenly you have a fraction in each bedroom, or something like that. So no, we've never done a count afterwards to say how many people moved in, and do you have 2 people in a 1-bedroom or 2 people and a baby in a 1-bedroom? So we know that sometimes there's more people, and we know sometimes after someone buys a 1-bedroom, the person goes off to college and there's only 1 person in the 1-bedroom. So there's no exactitude to it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd be curious when we look at this in our own regs if that requires an update. But what was the discussion related to not incorporating the land costs related to the lumberyard if we're going to incorporate, the other aspects, the number of FTEs that are generated through the lumberyard?
Well, we use the project. It was just difficult because it's not a fully planned project. The other projects that we looked at in terms of land cost, we had clear number of FTEs that were approved on those projects. Lumberyard, we had to make some assumptions. City Council certainly had conversations around some densities that we might anticipate seeing at the lumberyard, but we included all the costs that we paid for lumberyard to this point. We took the total land area, and then we used kind of an average of the densities from the other projects, which may be a little bit high because they're smaller parcels, but we thought it was kind of the best way to do it, and applied that to the lumberyard, and we got sort of FTEs, kind of a total number of FTE, and then a cost per FTE, per square foot of land, and that was averaged with the other projects that we had. And it had because of the size, because of the number of FTEs, it had a lowering effect on the land costs. But because it is a project that we have on the horizon, again, around defensibility, we needed to include that project. But we did include the what the city has paid for the different parcels over time.
And then my last question is, this board has had some loose debate related to, in the future, potentially adopting more of an affordability index. And I guess I'm just wondering, how would that affect this? Would we see that in terms of like the rental and sales number there to produce the fee in lieu outcome? Or I don't know if APCHA staff has thought about that, but it just came up for me as a curiosity.
Yeah, and I'd be really fascinated to learn more about that too. It's not something that I have a lot of familiarity with. It was certainly the kind of way that study kind of thought about the topic in 2012. But I know for our impact folks, that would be a difficult thing for them to contemplate a sort of an impact fee that's connected to affordability, because impact fees are really about like firm costs and revenues and pinning things down to like what does it actually cost to build a unit. So I think it's an interesting idea. It's certainly, I think, applicable to the larger kind of context around this stuff. But I do think it would be perhaps a little bit more difficult to defend from a defensibility perspective. But I think it's an interesting topic. I'd like to learn more.
It looks like Rachel and then Rick have some follow-up questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to let Rick go first, and I just wasn't sure where we're running out of time on this. I have one final comment when the time is due. Yeah,
I promised Cindy and Diane that I would not go over time, and I think I've already gone over time.
Okay, well then let me make my comment really quickly, and then Rick and whatever we'll do to close it out. But I just want to point out for this board that we have city code that we need to look at and continue to look at too. And so this isn't something Ben has done and made up, but that he's following our code, and I want to make sure we can change or look at changing. But as he said, Category 2 and Category 4 are the main categories we look at, and that's because residential mitigates at Category 2 and commercial mitigates at Category 4. And I'm really questioning that, and I'll just use, I work at City Market. They have their wages for hiring positions posted right by the bathrooms. Please, somebody come in and apply. And, the vast majority of workers there are going to be Category 3 or 2 or lower. And they're not Category 4 people. That's management. That's upper management. A Category 4 two-bedroom, a couple can have an income of $175,000. And so, we're mitigating commercial for upper management, even though most of our commercial properties generate far more service industry, lower income workers. Now, Category 2 is what we're charging residential. And we look at some of the $10 million mega mansions going up and the number of employees they may have, especially once they become a short-term rental. And almost every free market residential in our community is now becoming a commercial property of some sort, or at least part of the year, and requiring employees to come in and change the sheets and wash the windows and freshen up the flowers. So we are mitigating them at a lower level, perhaps, than they need. I've suggested that the City Council and the City Planning and Zoning and ComDev staff look at just mitigating both at Category 3 and not trying to create this distinction, because residentials are becoming commercial, period. And most commercial don't have Category 4 workers.
And so Rachel just identified one of the very big issues that I think we're going to be looking at over, the next several months to try to get some response to, because I do think there's a lot of questions in our growth management quota system that I think we need to sort of kind of reevaluate and look at, and that's certainly one of them. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah. I guess my last point is on these slides. These are proposed fee in lieu. This is the numbers you get when you subtract costs from revenues. Again, the costs are kind of fixed across the categories. We subtract the revenues that we pulled from kind of APCHA sales and rental rates, and those are the fee and lieu that kind of give some direction to value of different kinds of mitigation within the system. And because of the way that we calculate revenue, you can see like a fairly significant difference in the category increases between 2018 and now, and it goes up as you go up further in category. I think I've run out of time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just had one question, and it's sort of a follow-up to what Rachel said, and I'd be happy to connect with you on some of this further. Rachel made the comment about residentials moving into commercial. When I first moved to town, I mean, I lived 7 years in a free market affordable housing that's still free market. And I guess what I'm just sort of, as we look to make changes, and I think the multifamily replacement program fully support that. I guess just one question I had is, has there been any sort of analysis to look at those types of properties as so maybe a property that changed hands and what it became and what it sold for, just to sort of try and back into, is there a way maybe we could have rewritten some of this code to make it so that if you're in a developer's shoes and there is a multifamily that's being replaced, where the most profitable use of that property is to turn it into employee housing. I mean, is there any review? Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I think we've had policies in place for a long time. And I think if you talk to anybody in the development community, the current regulations that we have around multifamily replacement is that you cannot make a project pencil with the requirements that we have for the replacement of these properties that require, there's some choices that they have. And even with the credits program, it's just because of the astronomical costs when we get at a per square foot, that the kind of limitations, combine those with zoning restrictions on density, and it just becomes a really difficult thing to make a redevelopment project pencil. So that's one of the things that we're doing with Design Workshop. They've got some economic analysts that work for them, and we're looking at different scenarios, looking at specific properties, and trying to understand what kinds of, again, levers that we could pull to do two things. One, get some of these aging properties to perhaps be considered for redevelopment, but also to deliver, a balance of free market, deed-restricted category, deed-restricted resident occupied that I think the community expects out of kind of a redevelopment scenario. So yeah, it's absolutely the nature of the work that we're trying to get at with the multifamily study that we're doing.
Great, thanks. And then two more questions, Kelly and Rick, and then we'll move along.
And it's just more of a comment, really. The county and the city, we operate in a similar environment, but a little bit, a bit different context. And the county updated our impact fee last year, and we, at the time, said we were going to update it based on AMI annually. So we're retaking that up. And you might want to just check in with our ComDev, because from what I've heard, that fee went, it doubled. I mean, we went after it, and we have heard, boo. People are just paying it, So, some of the consideration was, well, do we mitigate at a certain percent? Do we mitigate make them mitigate at 100%? And we settled on a, I think it was 60%, and we're considering taking up a higher percentage. But
I'll check in with them. I know under previous numbers, I think we were significantly higher in the city than in the county, but I'll check up with them. I have not seen their updated numbers, to be quite honest. It's a good suggestion.
Rick, I think you're on mute.
Ben, I had a quick question, a little confusion here. I did some rough calculations today, added up all the Mark Hunt's outstanding housing credits that he's sitting on, and it comes to about 200. I'm curious, what's the difference between a private guy that has housing credits, and I'm looking here at the lumber yard that may put out almost 744 FTs, or I don't know what that translates in housing credits. But what does the city do with housing credits? What is the public sector doing with housing credits?
We do not generate any housing credits on public projects. Credits projects are limited to private sector development of affordable housing.
So that affects both public-private partnerships?
No, those because they were built on city land and were done in partnership. The city helped with the financing of those things. Those private-public partnerships did not pull credits either. The only projects that pull credits are private sector projects.
Okay, thank you.
I would say that the city council, 3 members said, why is the city not allowed to purchase housing credits? And we may look at that in the future. There's probably some pros and cons to it. But Rick, you raise a really good question, because the real distinction is that something like the lumberyard is to catch up on overall shortfall, and housing credit units are created to mitigate new growth.
Got it.
And just
all right.
isn't the city able to use units built to count against mitigation for other projects? So like the office, new office space, that wasn't required to show direct housing built for mitigation for it because there was a record of building housing.
Yeah, I think it's more symbolic than anything. The city offices and nonprofit organizations are considered essential public facilities. That city council can waive kind of affordable housing requirements for kind of nonprofits, government organizations. The new ambulance facility, for example, was an essential public facility. The hospital is an essential public facility. And so I think when the city kind of builds units, I live in a city of Aspen employee housing unit. That unit that was built behind the police station, it's not that there's a formal credit that's issued for anything of that, but I do think that the city uses those units that have been built and acquired over time by the city as, hey, we are housing a significant number of our employees, and so when we build city office buildings, where we feel like we're doing our part by these projects that we've built across the community. I know for a fact that I am over time. And I think you've all had very good questions and understand these issues very well. And I would just offer that if you ever have topics that you want to summon the city to have a conversation with you about, myself or Philip Sapino, the Community Development Director, would be more than thrilled to come and talk with you further about these topics.
Hey, Ben, thank you, and I really appreciate both your presentation and the depth of discussion you're able to have today. And I also appreciate that you can be summoned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
The magic words.
And you should always accept an invitation to dine with Ben. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, thank you. Let me stop sharing here, and you guys can go about your business. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Okay, that brings us to standards for sellers to obtain maximum sales price. A continued discussion. Diane, do you want to take that?
Yes, and I will share my screen. Okay. So what we're going to do tonight is we will fly through this because we do want to go into executive session. I believe it's 6:30. We want to shoot for that. So first and foremost, thank you to those who were able to provide feedback, both through email and then through the survey that you're able to complete. As a reminder, what we're talking about tonight is kind of putting in a box that question of doing a pilot inspection program. And there are all kinds of questions around, will anyone want to do it? Will only people who have great houses want to do it? Will we get the houses we want to? What types of units? There are all kinds of questions. And the reality is this is a first and a baby step. And I, thanks to Phyllis Mattice, I reached out to Teton County and their housing nonprofit today. And they do, and asking them, hey, what do you do in this space? Because Phyllis had some, knew that they had a program. And they do have a home inspection requirement by a professional home inspector prior to a sale. I think the advantage is their program's not as big and isn't necessarily as their properties aren't as old. But there are models out there, and we can continue to look at those. But just wanted you to know that. So as you can read here on the screen, this is kind of what we put together as a suggestion. Staff was recommending target properties because most of the capital improvements specifically have to do with freestanding single-family properties, ones that an individual seller would have to deal with, right? An individual seller is not going to have to address it would be hard to hold them responsible for the requirements of an HOA to fix a roof, for example. And the third slide was just a reminder of how we recommended this happen. And also remind you that I have been talking to Mona Akor about the potential for a marrying this with an home energy inspection. What I'll do right now is go through these questions one by one that are in your packet. I have included in here where someone put in a specific suggestion, where a board member put in a specific suggestion. That's in here as well. And Cindy and Bethany and I will all be taking copious notes as we go through this. Before we get going on this, does anyone have any questions before I jump into questions? All righty, we'll rock. So first question, what should we target? There was, actually, I think this piece is included in the report, and I can't switch screens right now to look at it, but we did have a suggestion of targeting 50 homes and providing people a $500 incentive towards a capital improvement. What I've put in here is some reasons why staff kind of targeted 100, and the perspective that even if we're not able to get all of them done, at least we've started. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Okay, so I guess then are we just looking for discussion around whether 100 is the right number? Is that what we're trying to determine right now? Looks like Rachel has a comment.
That's a good point, and thank you for bringing that up, Carson, because I do, right, it would be my hope that we could get board direction to move forward on a pilot program. It's going to take us a couple months to put it in place. We would need to do a request for quotes from the building community. We don't know, there may be some pieces we come back to the board with as we go through and kind of set this up. But we would like to leave with some direction tonight. So with that, thank you. And Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. First, I may have gotten confused going through the full packet, not your scribes now, Diane, but it talked about capital improvements like twice. And one time I thought the second half was talking more about the livability standards inspection versus this, but it kept using the term capital. So I just want to keep those really separate, unless, again, I was misunderstanding that, you know, we need to call those the livability standard maintenance improvements or something, but not capital improvements, or we'll be getting ourselves confused. I agree with wanting to start the program to get the inspection. I am one of the people who just kind of wonders how many people are going to open their doors voluntarily with no incentive whatsoever. And so I was suggesting that, you know, maybe it'd be better to target 50 and offer them something to do it. I think you're going to see other things as well. You know, I use the analogy, it's like having your parents come and visit or something, and you got to spend the whole 2 weeks beforehand cleaning everything you haven't cleaned, and doing that on top of your work schedule and raising kids. And homes are a private space, and they're very personal. And so, you know, unless someone sees, hey, what's an advantage to me, I have a real hard time knowing, other than a few really great citizens who are really proud of how great their houses are being kept up, are going to volunteer for this. So that's the only real reality I put out there. And then I guess, you know, part of it, the public is going to want to know, and I would want to know, what is the expectation level of the inspectors, especially when you get to talking about much older mobile homes. I mean, I'm sure the counties run into this when they started looking at what's really on the lots at Phillips Curve. We know, you know, some people have really gotten nice new modulars in there in Woody Creek, and others haven't. But, you know, again, it's really hard to start down any path that you don't know where it's going to take you at the end. You're walking into a dark tunnel. So a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, how does this relate to the next things they're going to tell me? And that is how do you pay for the capital improvement side of things? And so, you know, I'm just trying to voice what I think would be concerns out there. But I agree with starting it. I think you've done a great job outlining it. But I just don't know if this is enough to get people to say, yes, hey, I get a free inspection. You know, Corps been offering free energy inspections for a long time, and, you know, that's one thing. It wasn't going to affect their resale value later, or what they think they have as equity or maximum appreciation. I don't know that they've ever accomplished as many homes as they've wanted to, you know, for the same reasons. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And yeah, you make a good point about what is the inspector looking for. We are limiting it exclusively to life safety type capital improvements, right? This is dangerous. This is unlivable. Those types of things. And the list that we use as APCHA was identified in last week's packet, but in the section talking about creating a future sellers program. We would definitely work with the inspectors and make sure we were very specific about that. Your point about how this relates to the future is very real. And, you know, I think you and David both suggested potentially an incentive program. And I look at that, and given what I've heard over the past two meetings, I think that may be a better idea, right? And a $500 incentive may not be enough, but if it's a, hey, we'll provide it gives us a starting point, and then we see what is that at all a hook. And so I'd love to hear comments on that, as well as other comments on this particular question.
Think of it this way: City Market is offering everyone a $100 bonus for getting a vaccine. RAFTA is offering everyone a $500 bonus to get a vaccine. You would think a vaccine is life, health, safety, and you want to get it yourself no matter what, but just to get people beyond their reluctance on something like that, there's an incentive. So that's, you know, surprising but true.
So we'll offer a home inspection, vaccine, and $500.
Yeah, there you go.
Get John has a question, and then Francie.
Thanks. I guess my question really, maybe I'm obtuse, but what's the point of doing? I mean, we're gonna pay for an inspection. Somebody's gonna take it, let's say 50, and we give a $500 incentive to fix whatever they uncover or whatever. But I mean, what's the use of the document, the inspection we get today? I mean, somebody can choose to do it. Is it the purpose to inform somebody of here's the problems in your unit, here's the problems we see? I mean, to me, you're going to throw 40 grand into something that maybe a tenth of the people actually take seriously and do something with. To me, the inspection should be, it goes to when we're closing units or, selling units and taking an inspection and either taking that data, taking the unit up to standard and then selling it. But, I guess I fail to see how this data is going to be used appropriately or significantly.
Sure, John, it's a great question. I appreciate you asking. So while all the things you identified are definitely, we would like homeowners to know all of that, the primary purpose is to give the board some information, right? It may be skewed, but it's going to be more than we have right now about the condition of homes. And
Those are like a sample size of, 100 units, and we can say, well, 10% of them were really bad shape, so we extrapolate that over our 3,000 units and say 300 are in pretty miserable shape, kind of thing.
No, I actually don't think that'll be the purpose, because you're absolutely right. You can't. It's not going to be. It wouldn't be I don't think, a statistically significant sample size, and the board has already identified all of the reasons why that sample will be skewed just by the nature of it being a voluntary program. The piece of information that I really want the board to have is if we have 10 data points on what are the capital needs, that will inform whatever you develop for a program for sellers or future capital improvements. The big program, how are we going to address APCHA property needs in the future? One of the things I'm concerned about is if we start to find that homes that are selling for let's say $700,000, they need $300,000 in capital improvements. That may be a point you say, wow, it is not reasonable to either, one, hold the seller accountable for that, or two, hold the seller accountable for half of it and put half into the resale price because of what it does to the price appreciation. And so it's really those tidbits of data that allow you to make better, I believe, than you can make now on where to go on seller standards. Thank you.
I think Tom has some input on this.
Yeah, I think in addition, if you think about it, it's going to have an effect on transactions that follow these inspections. So, one of the issues has been, in some of the bad cases that we know about, that both sellers and buyers can be surprised by what happens when a property is listed and a contract is entered into. And these reports will put sellers on notice that, okay, if you don't do this stuff when you sell your property, you've got a problem with minimum standards, so you better expect that you're not going to get maximum resale price. And it will also put potential buyers on notice in advance of signing a contract. They'll have this information, APCHA will have this information, it'll be available. And so they'll be able to make a more informed decision in advance of signing a contract and then complaining that the property isn't in very good shape.
But Tom, what you say is we have no teeth today, and buyers are already on notice on Centennial properties. We know they've got problems there, and they still close. So unless we have teeth, the inspection is meaningless.
Well, I think one of the things we talked about is the staff level, and I may have brought it up before, is that we want to put more teeth in the rules about enforcing minimum standards. So I think that's a very important part of this process. But, one of the other things is maybe buyers, when they get information, they might ignore it, but some of them might say, hey, wait a minute. If I sell it in another year, I'm going to want to get my best price. Maybe I should start doing some of this stuff. So, John, to some extent, we can't control all of this. Buyers can just ignore the report. And in that sense, perhaps there isn't any teeth in it. But, part of the complaints are that APCHA isn't doing enough to get people the information they need to make informed decisions. And at least to that extent, I think this might help the process when we come into these contracts.
Well, an easy fix to that is every home sale requires an inspection going forward.
Correct, but
And we say, okay, we'll split the cost and do 50% of it, and the seller pays the other 50, or the buyer pays the other 50. And then they're informed, and then they can make a decision one way or the other.
that you can do it that way, and this way it's being done now. Except for the costs, I think. The costs are borne by the buyer, as in any free market transaction. But we're not paying for any inspections now.
And the home inspection is not currently required, and the recommendation from staff, and Cindy and I and Bethany and I discussed this, the thought with this program is, if you can get a little bit more information prior to, I don't see this board wanting to immediately go to requiring home inspections and the seller has to be 100% accountable for the capital improvements that are life safety related. Right? That feels to me, what I've heard from the board and talking to staff, like a bridge too far. What we're trying to do is put in place a pilot program. It's a test, and put it in place pretty quickly so that the board can start to gain information. Right? We are not intending to use this as an immediate, okay, and now owner, you have to do this. People are going to be afraid of that. And we're going to have to make it clear that that is not the intent right now. I do believe that to come up with a true standards for capital improvements and how you want people to be accountable for that cost, or for some other entity to be responsible for that cost, or some type of second mortgage type program, that's going to require a whole lot more discussion, public input, and more data. Thank you.
Agreed. Well, so we're 6:24 here. In the interest of sort of keeping us on schedule, we do have 4 other questions that we're going to try and get answered here in roughly the next 10 minutes or so. So I guess maybe Francie's had her hand up for quite a while. Let's go to Francie. I mean, I guess what maybe we should focus on is there anyone else that thinks that we should not move forward with this? So John's been pretty clear. Maybe let's.
Well, I'd like to adjust it. Instead of sending 40 grand on kind of arbitrary numbers, why don't we just spend the 40 grand on the next 100 units that sell and pay for a full inspection? I'd motion that tonight.
Francie, you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I know that APCHA has had some bad press lately, and making a big change might be a little bit, might rock the boat too much, but it seems like if we have at least responsibility for these units, that it's incumbent on us to know what kind of shape they're in. I mean, I'm thinking about a place that has mold growing in it, and we don't know it, and somebody gets incredibly sick from mold, and then, you know, where are we in that responsibility? So I feel, I mean, I'm new, so take that into consideration, but I feel like all homes should be inspected to the best of our ability over the next few years, and it's not optional. And I know there'd be an outcry, but I just think that if we have any authority and any responsibility at all over these units, we need to know that they are not unsafe.
Rick and then Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. I live in an HOA, and I pay dearly in my HOA dues to put away for reserves for capital improvements. Why shouldn't a single-family homeowner be doing the same thing? Why shouldn't they pay for their capital improvements? Why does it have to be split between he and the buyer, or APCHA and the seller? the whole onus should be on the seller to have the responsibility of putting away reserves for the eventual capital replacements that they're going to require or be required to do prior to sale.
Indeed. It's a complex issue, to say the least.
But I think those questions were raised in the survey, and I think we'll be better informed once Diane has a chance to extrapolate all of our answers.
So I've got Kelly and Rachel, but I'm going to go to Tom real quick. He's got something to add.
Okay. Very simple and quick on Rick's point. We would have to change deed restrictions and maybe the regulations in order to do that. So that would require some more process, but you could do it. I think you would have the authority to do it, because when you sell these units, especially if APCHA steps in, as it has done in some cases, to buy a unit and then transfer it to the next buyer, you can impose some changes on the deed restrictions and impose some requirements on the buyers. And that's not to me, that wouldn't be an unreasonable thing. But you got to think about what the amounts are going to be and that it doesn't make the unit unaffordable for the buyer. But that's where you'd have to do it, is at the time of the transaction when a new buyer acquires the unit.
Agreed. And I mean, that would be my thought as far as how we tackle this, is to try and set it going forward, and then we can work on kind of the existing, because there's so many moving pieces there. But John, I mean, just to your point, my personal experience, I bought this house in May. There were 3 items identified in the inspection as needing to be corrected that I think would qualify under that safety, health, whatever. And it was the old, well, if you don't want it, we'll go to one of the other 40 people that bid on the unit. So I think if we get if we can get some information to start with on these single families and then work on sort of the plan going forward, then I think we can address how we deal with the current stuff, the current properties next. So with that, Kelly, I'm going to go ahead.
I'll be quick. I'll say, related to this question, for me, I guess if we don't know how many willing participants there are, that we should just structure an RFP to pay out as work is accomplished rather than commit to 100 inspections to an inspector. Just, fiduciary responsibility there. But yeah, I think it might be tough to get people to agree to this. I think John's idea has some merit as far as sales are happening. Can we interject and collect better knowledge as the sale is happening? I think reach out to the county and see how much information is on Phillips Curve houses. I don't actually know how detailed those inspections are, but there's 40 homes there, so that might provide a wealth of information about some properties. And then, finally, looking at the really big picture of this, I can't see a situation where the community and, policymakers such as us would not have an investment in preserving already existing affordable housing. And this is we're looking at now, but we're looking ahead, right? These homes are only getting older, and I just can't see us not having an interest as a community to recognize it's going to be cheaper to keep homes maintained than it will be to replace them. And so this, for me, provides some information to sort of back up what I think is a coming demand anyway. And there's a variety of ways to get at that. That's a whole separate conversation. But in that context, I do think that this type of program will provide more information to substantiate that conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, and I'll try to talk as fast as I can too. But maybe we should start going to the meetings that go from 4 to 7 or something to get through these topics we have. I think it's given the kind of normal business we have to go through. I think there's some merit to John's idea as well. It kind of along the lines of what Francie was saying and Kelly was saying, that anything that comes in for a sale now should get a real inspection, not just the type of inspection we've been doing so far. But I don't want to wait for the next 100 homes to come through. That, you know, some years that could take 2 years, and we could not, you know, miss entire different types of homes. And, you know, I think the single families are the ones that turn over the least for the most part. So I think we need to, you know, do both, you know, start inspecting homes as they come up for sale and continue with the pilot program going forward. I agree with Kelly, not contracting for the full amount, because we might get the first 15 who come in for free. We might have to struggle for the ones afterwards. And if the ones afterwards are starting to get a cash incentive, I'd want to give it back to the first 15 who came in for free, just to, you know, as an equity question. But the bigger thing this really raises, go back to it, everyone's comments are related into it, and that's the overall system as a whole. Has appreciation done what we thought it would do? When I have a neighbor who's bought a home for $50,000 30 plus years ago, and with their appreciation, you know, I don't know if they can't move anywhere else. There's not enough, you know, to ever move anywhere. So people keep talking about them moving out and freeing up a bedroom. I don't know where they're going to move to, but has it been enough to keep up with the investment? You know, are we asking the impossible? And as was said before, well, maybe if APCHA puts money in, or we increase the sales price, we're eventually going to buy it back down to something affordable for that category. I think we need to look at the whole cycle and the whole system that we're set up in, rather than keep tinkering around the edges, because I'm not sure it's entirely accurate the way we have it now. And if we've just set up this conundrum where we've put people earning $80,000 a year into a house that costs $400,000 to build, and we expect them to basically replace it or have it in reserves or escrows over a 30 or 40 year period, to everything from soup to nuts as what needs to be done, we might be asking far more than that income family will ever be able to do. And we need to start looking at, you know, some of the premises behind it. As I've kind of said in my notes before, you can't tap your appreciation until you sell. So, you know, unless you got a second trust or got a loan, you know, hey, I got $30,000 of appreciation. I could redo that whole bathroom. It'd be really nice. But I have to take a loan out from a bank to do it. You know, maybe we need to create an appreciation bank that people can borrow from, do the project, you know, and then start deducting it from their eventual resales as it depreciates. But right now, people are kind of in a what we always call a structural deficit. You know, we have created a structural deficit with the expectation of how much money someone can pay to replace the unit that they're currently still paying off to buy, is kind of what I'm saying. You know, how much do we expect someone who buys a $300,000 home to reinvest in that home without any return over time? Is it more than the appreciation rate that we're giving them? That's kind of what I'm asking. Are we expecting them to invest more in the home over a 20-year horizon or a 30-year horizon than the allowance of appreciation we give them actually is? We need to answer that question. That's all. Thank you.
So, hearing you know, from John, from Kelly, and Rachel, and I'm in agreement as well. Sounds like there is support. John, I think that's a good idea. Rachel, John, would you support that? So maybe taking 100 home inspections and splitting it, you know, half between the single family and then the other half between the properties as they come due. And then a follow on that, if so, is from Diane. I'm going to go to you. I mean, is there anything from your standpoint that would sort of make that not possible? So, John, is that something you would support?
Yeah, no, I agree that you may not get 100 in that first, you know, the first year, but I think should be a buyer's bonus, right? That we just pay for the inspection. And if we've got, you know, because I was with Rachel to begin with, I don't think you're going to get a lot of people go, hey, come inspect my house. So.
Agreed. I think that's a great idea. Diane, anything on your end that would prevent us from going down that track?
No, it will. I believe it will take it will require a change in the regulations. Because and just two things to think about, because it may be better for me to come back next meeting with an incentive, like $1,000 incentive program, specifically because professional home inspections are not currently required as part of the APCHA regulations. If you do that, it changes the information source, and some owners may perceive it as punishment.
Well, but buyers can require an inspection in their contract. So Cindy could write it into or Pam could write it in the contract. But as a buyer, if I don't have to pay for it, I'll take it. I think most buyers would be that way, right? They look at it and go, oh, $1,000 or $500 or whatever it is to do an inspection. I don't want to, that's okay. I don't need to do that. But if they're getting it for free. My issue, my wonder was on seller's side, like requiring inspection. It's like we said, same thing as Carson went through. Do they really use it? And then you just move on to the next. But at least we've got the data on those units closing, right? That's the point of what you're trying to get to, wasn't it?
It is. And here's the thing is, right, it's a good idea. Maybe Cindy, can you weigh in? Can we require people to do a home inspection?
No.
Then APCHA require it.
We do not require them at the time of listing to do one. It is in the contract that the buyer has the option of doing an inspection, and most do that. Most of them hire an inspector, pay for an inspector, and they get an inspection report done. What would be nice is really to add to the regulations that at the time of listing, prior to listing, they have to let us know that they're listing, and that we, even if we pay for it, that we will tell them that this inspector is going to be coming out and doing an inspection on the property. And at that point in time, after we're under a listing contract, and after we do the lottery, the buyer at that point in time can opt to use the inspection that was done, so they don't have an additional charge. Or if they still want to do their own inspection, they do their own inspection, but then they pay for it.
Now, Cindy, that's helpful. Because what I just heard is we don't have to change the APCHA regulations. We simply have to ask we have to offer it to the buyer as hey, APCHA is going to pay for this. This is what we're doing now. Are you okay with that? And we basically take the first 100, and if we get a rush on them, yay. We'll make it up. We'll make up for it in 2% commissions. Does that sound like where people want to go?
Yeah, I think Tom's got some input here.
No, I don't think.
Oh.
Sellers cannot preclude buyers from making an inspection. Right. No way. 2, we need to put teeth in the minimum standards so that if those inspections show deficiencies, sellers could be required to reduce their price. 3, we need to address what I'll call the Carson problem, where people go down the list when the buyer says, hey, you got to fix this, and they go to the next person who won't require that. We have to close that loophole. We have to find a way to close that loophole.
And Tom, that's our next phase. It's just we're initiating.
I understand, but in order to put the inspection business in context, I just wanted to make those comments. Yeah.
And by the way,
right,
I think we're okay on time. I don't think executive session's going to.
It's not going to be too long.
Okay, great. So, Diane, sounds like
we can
got some consensus there.
Quickly.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying we can, sorry, my internet connection's unstable. We can implement a version where we just ask the buyer if we can say, hey, APCHA is willing to pay for your inspection, are you okay doing it? And as a condition of APCHA paying for it, we get a copy of the report.
By the way, we get a
Well,
copy of
Cindy-
the, we
Cindy-
already
or
get a copy of the
Who writes the
report.
contract? I mean, right, if the buyer writes the contract, so who is it, Cindy writing the contract?
Well,
And she
it's,
says,
APCHA writes the
we're gonna
contract.
pay for the inspection.
What I don't understand is the right now, it's part of the contract. We get a copy of the inspection, we always get a copy of the inspection report, and the buyer, if they opt to do an inspection, they pay for it. I guess I don't understand why in a situation like this, why we would say, well, now we'll pay for it, even though you were gonna do it anyway.
So Cindy, do we have the right to share that information with the board, and we have them on all the properties that are sold?
No, the inspection report, inspection report is really between us to review, to see what's going on, and the buyer. And the buyer doesn't even have to share it with the seller. But they usually do. It belongs, right now, but I think, well, actually, we probably would, because if we were paying for it, we could. And that would be the only difference. Because right now, if the buyer pays for it, they actually own it. But they do provide us a copy of it. But if we pay for it, then to me, we could share it.
Tom?
We get a copy of the report, no matter where it comes from, it's public record and has to be disclosed.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here, and I know we have an executive session, but I would ask the question, even if it's part of a work product, does it have to be disclosed? Can they, so they can't be kept as a study?
It's not within the definition of work product.
Okay. Well, maybe we should find a way to structure this in the definition of a work product if we're going to.
I don't know why we would want these reports to be secret anyway. These are publicly subsidized properties. I mean, what's that about?
Well,
Right.
For me, Tom, it's about, are we still trying to get people who will want to do this voluntarily before they're selling? You know, some years we have 50 sales, some years we have 25 sales. If we're going to ask people voluntarily to open their doors to an inspection, which I'm hoping is still part of this, I really don't want to just depend on what's selling now as an assessment of what's out there in the full community. It has to be a little bit of both. You know, I think we're just saying, let's start to take care of the people who are coming in the door now, who are buyers and sellers, and trying to take care of them better. But that doesn't mean we want to can the entire research project to understand the broader capital needs out there within single-family homes. That would be my impression of the discussion.
Well, I don't have an answer to the non-disclosure question off the top of my head. I think it's going to be problematic, but I can look into it.
If the rest of the board is on board with what Rachel just suggested, we can come back at the next meeting with a combination of just more information about what can we provide you, and in what form do we have the inspection reports? Or are they do we store them in a way that we can easily kind of pull some information and start to do some work on that end, and also come back with an incentive program for people who own their property now, as let's see if a $500 or $1,000 incentive on repairs might get us there. Thoughts?
Okay.
Great.
I did hear some comment that folks wanted it to be more so than not just single family, the incentive program, not just for single family homes, but also for townhomes and condos. Is that?
I thought we were talking about only for the ones who are coming in to sell. I didn't think we were expanding the whole capital inventory to everything yet. I mean, we still only have $40,000 to work with, folks. Yeah.
Remember, we
Anybody
also
else?
have, remember, we also have director's comments as well, and it's almost 10 till.
Yeah.
Okay, I can wrap this up. I'll come back with, still focusing on looking at what we have for data, looking at a single-family home program where we would provide an incentive. We'd hire some local licensed inspectors to do it. I won't raise this question 4 at this point, and we'll come back with another version of this. So, okay to wrap on this, Carson?
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you for the discussion. Okay, so now director's comments. Does anyone have director's comments? Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to also reiterate what Rachel called out a little bit before. I think we need to extend our meetings. We have important policy conversations. I would maybe suggest maybe if we do executive session from 4 to 5 or 4 to 4:30. And then, you know, really be able to give more time, I think, to these topics, because we need to give more time to these topics. This is too truncated. You know, I appreciate the city sort of coming for referral comments on their code changes, but that's, you know, we need to spend more time on our direct stuff too. So just a better balance there on our meetings, and I'm willing to, you know, put the extra hour and be available, and we've done it before, and I think we'll get more done. So thanks for your consideration.
Carson, is it okay if we ask the board if it's okay to start at 4? As staff, we're very supportive. We've discussed that. Don't know if it works for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in agreement. I mean, 25 minutes for this discussion is far too little. Is there anyone? I guess let me ask it this way: is there anyone that would object to starting at 4 when we have these? Well, I guess that's the question. Do we want to always start at 4, or is the question let's ask that question first. Just moving the meeting time to starting at 4. Is there anybody that objects to that? If so, raise your hand. I see none. So it looks like we've got some clear direction there. Any other comments?
I did say thank you for that. There may be meetings where we, for some reason, don't need all 3 hours. I haven't seen that in like the past, well, since I started working with APCHA. So having a flexible end time is easier than having a flexible start time. So I think moving the meetings to 4 works great. Thank you. On behalf of staff, we really appreciate that. And do know when we get requests from other departments, as Rachel can tell you, Ben and team and the council, I think they went 3 hours on that topic the other night. So we Cindy and I tag team to corral it into a manageable process, and also it is important that as the representatives of kind of the existing workforce housing program that folks like that hear from all of you. So do know we're working on managing that as best we can. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments? Seeing none, I would take a motion to, if someone would like to read the motion on the agenda to move into executive session.
You want? I'll do that, Carson.
Hey, John, go ahead.
Sorry. I motion to move into executive session to obtain legal advice from APCHA attorney in accordance with CRS 24-6-4024B for a conference with the authority's attorney on the purpose of receiving legal advice on the specific legal questions for the legal case APCHA versus Mulcahy 2015 CV 30150, APCHA versus Mulcahy 2021 CV 3000, APCHA versus Mulcahy, or Mulcahy versus APCHA 18-CV-01918.
Got a motion from John.
I'll second.
Second from Rick. Cindy, please call the roll.
John,
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Tom, go ahead.
The record, this does not need to be recorded. This executive session does not need to be recorded because